Okay, this is going to be an introduction to some of the techniques or tools that can be used when working with the report in Educata, and in particular, how to use the filters. The filters are going to be the key to basically pulling apart the data and looking at specific things that are going to be useful for you in terms of understanding a child's performance on whatever measures you're using. So today I'll be walking through how to set up filters and how to use them effectively. Okay, so you're going to obviously put in your password for the report. And once you do that, it opens up to your report. And just as a reminder, when you've got a report in Educata, every blue number or text that has an underline in it, like 416 here or 2082 up in the right-hand corner, these are basically the number of individual forms that have been submitted associated with that part of your report. So on the top where it says evaluation date, to 2082 means there have been 2082 submissions of forms thus far for this report. Whereas the row here, which shows the student, Ryan G here, shows there have been 416 submissions for that particular student and so forth. Okay. The percentages are the percentages overall given the number of entries within this category or question. So for the student question, these are all the different students in a program. And so thus far, this one student basically consists of almost 20% or 19.98% of all the records submitted thus far. Okay. So the key is that you want to be able to filter the data because in most cases, you're not necessarily going to want to look at the overall summative report, which is what you get when you first open up a report. It's a summative representation of all the data or all the forms you've submitted thus far. But in most cases, that's not the level of analysis you want. You're going to want to look at a particular date range or a student within a particular date range or something else. So therefore, in order to get to that, you want to be able to filter the data. Filter, just as a filter implies, is narrowing down on some dimensions within that report. Okay, so the way you get the filter is that when you've got your report opened up, if you look into the lower right-hand corner of the report, you're going to see some grayed out icons. And as I hover my mouse over it, they turn black. You've got a whole series of icons here, and I'm just going to review them right now before going into the filters. The first one that you see is actually the filter icon, and when you hover over that, it says Add Filter, which is what we'll do. If you want to convert the report you have into a PDF, then you click on the icon to the right of the filter button. If you want to drop your data set that you have into an Excel file, perhaps because you want to run some other kinds of analyses, or there's some other kinds of charts that you want to use within the Excel application, then dump it into an Excel file, upload it into Excel, and then you can do whatever you want with the data. If you want to be able to delete individual form responses, you can click there, select the particular form that you want, and delete it from your data set. If you want to look at the different forms that have been responded, you can click here and view it by the respondents. And then this is very useful. This is a table of contents of your report. So if you've got a long report with lots of information, rather than scrolling, you can just basically go to the particular part of the report that you have, click on it, and zoom right to that section of your report. And then lastly, if you've been zooming around in a long report, you can click up this arrow and go right up to the top, which is where we are right now. Okay, so those are all different icons that allow you to do different things with your report. But today, again, the focus, because that's going to be the most important tool, is to focus on filtering. So here we are at the start. I want to click on the icon, and I want to add a filter. When I do that, I get this initial interface that's just basically confirming that I do want to filter the data, and I do. So I click on the little button here. It says Add Filter. Okay. Now I've got the little interface here, and I just want to walk through the different components. Okay. So up on top where it says Select Filter Type, I've got three options: question, date, and email. Okay. This is basically a section of the filtering that you can pretty much largely ignore for most of the types of reports that are being built. And that's because there is no email information in most of the reports that are created for different schools or programs. This date part may be useful for some programs or some reports, depending on how you are actually collecting your data. For most of the programs, the form itself actually has a question, which is actually coming up here on top, called evaluation date. That's the date that you're actually collecting the data on. And that is to be differentiated from the date above, which is the submit date. So whenever you're collecting data and entering data into an Educata form, as soon as you click the submit button, the computer will timestamp that with a date and time. That's what this date is. So if you only have the submit date and you click here on date, then what you can do is specify the start and end date for the submit date. But insofar as any of your records get detached from the actual submit date, so that you may be referencing a few days before, this date will no longer be reliable because that's the submit date. Okay, so in most cases, you're going to focus in on the question that is within the form. And once you have that option, which is what it defaults to, then the second area of the filter is the question. So in this particular report, you can see here there are a lot of questions in this report. The key idea here is that every question within a form is potentially something you can filter by in the report. Okay, so think of your forms as providing you with different distinctions that allow you to filter the data in a number of different ways. Okay, so to start simply, let's say we want to filter the report simply by the evaluation date. Okay, so that's the first question. And once I've selected that question, then I'm going to be given some options. And the key one here is the final part here on the bottom says include records. Okay, so what I want to be able to do is give a potentially a range of values. So I want to say include records that are, and I could say between. Okay, so let's say I only want to see data in the system that is between the in the month of September. Okay, so I want to go between, let's say in this case is important, the end of August, and I'll tell you why this is important in a second, of 2020 to 10/01/2020. Now, this may seem a little strange, right? I said I wanted September. The reason for this is because between truly means in between. So I want 9/1 as my first day of September and 9/30 as my last day. So I'm going in between the last day of August and the first day of October. Okay. The format here is important, and I've intentionally made an error. In Educata, it's DD, and 4Ys. So I actually need to put in here 08. Okay. So now you can see I've got 08 for August, 31 and 2020. And then I've got 10/01/2020. Once I've got my filter set up in terms of the date range, ignore the filter logic for a moment. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. I now save that. Okay. And now when I come back to my report, what you've seen now there was a lot of data before, something like 2,000 records or something like that. Now I've dropped it down to 157. This is now filtered the report into simply the month of September and the number of records we have. Okay, so that's creating one filter. Let's come back now and do that again for something different. Okay, so I go back, I'm going to edit my filter. Okay, and we're going to stick for right now with just one filter. Now I want to filter by a student. So I come down to my questions. The second question in my form, in this case, therefore the report, is the student. Okay, And now when I select student, notice what comes up is select the answer. These are now all the students that are in the program. So if I want a particular student, one who was particularly high, let's say in the month of September, I'm going to pick that student. Okay. So now I've selected the question, which is a student. I've selected the answer, which is that particular student. I now click save. And then I go back to my report. And now, as you can see, only that student has been selected. So we've now got a database of 191 records and only for that student. That is confirmed based on the fact that now this one student takes up 100% of the data and everybody else is a zero. Okay, so now when I scroll through my report looking at different aspects of the form, I can see that one student. Here are the people who are reporting incidences on this report for that particular student. In this case, this is a report which is looking at breaks and timeouts. This is the number of those records. I'm seeing no restraints here, and so forth and so on. Every single table and graph is now locked into that particular student in the same way that when we narrow down the range of dates just to the month of September, everything in the report would just be for that month. Okay, so that is now one filter either for date or for student. Let's now come back to the single filtering again. So I could then do the same thing for a whole bunch of different things, right? If I wanted to look at, in this case, what type of support was given here. Okay, now when I have my answers, I have a self-requested type of support, a staff-directed type of support, and so forth and so on. Okay, so that's how you set up a single filter. Okay, but now in many cases, you're going to be interested in not just one type of filtering, but multiple types of filtering. Let's start with a simple example. Let's say I want to look at one student. Let's go back and pick that same student. Okay. And let's say I want to look at the student Derek during a particular time period. Let's say like the month of September. So now I'm going to add a second filter. Okay. I get exactly the same interface. Filter 1 is the student. Filter 2 is exactly where it is. It's evaluation date. And remember, I now want to include records that are between, is the date range we did before, but I could also say, well, just have it after the month of September. Okay, so now I can just say later then. So now I'm going to put in 09, 01, let's say 2020, because I know that school didn't, let's say, start until later in September. So I'm just going to pick the start of September moving forward. Now what I've got is two filters, the student and the date. But now is where this second part of the filtering is important, and that's the filter logic. When you have two or more filters, you need to tell the system what is the relationship between them. And here's a simple rule of thumb. You've got to specify either and or, okay? And it's very simple if you think about it this way. When the two questions or filters are from different questions, as they are here, one is for student and one is for date. Let me just erase this so we can be all clear again. When each filter is from a different question, then you are going to use and. Okay. In contrast, if the two filters are from the same question, and I'm going to show you that here, let's say you want to look at two different students, either Derek or Aaron, then you put in the or logic. Okay, so to repeat, if the relationship between your two filters is different questions, then you use and. If it's from the same question, you use or. All right, so let's go back to our original example. We have student and the evaluation date, and we want that to be later than 09/01/2020. And now we apply and. This is going to tell the system, please look only at this one student named Derek W. and only for the dates that appear after September 1, 2020. Again, save and back. So now you can see for this one student during the month from September 1st on, we have 130 records. And again, therefore, everything that we see in this report for every single table and graph is just for that student, just for the period of time, September 1st, 2020 and on. Okay, that's going to be probably one of the more common types of double filter moves that you'll be using. You want a student and you want a date range. Okay, so that's the primary move for filtering, two filters. But I want to show you a couple of other things that can be done in case you want to dissect even further. Okay, so I go back to edit filter. Okay, and now I can keep building. I can add a couple more filters I want. Let's say I want to say, let's look at only Derek, only the date range that is after September 1st. And how about something else? What if I want to look at only, let's go to type of support. Let's look only at what's called a staff-directed break. Okay, so I'm not interested in this case in the self-requested breaks. I only want to look at staff-directed breaks. Okay, so I pick that. So now what do I have? Well, I've got student, one question, evaluation date, a second question, and type of support, a third question. So again, the AND logic applies to the relationship between all three of these. I click save, I click back, and now I should potentially see fewer records, right? It was 130 on the last one. Now I'm down to 117. So of all the records that the student had during September 1st and on, that were only staff-directed breaks, I now have 117. So again, everything that follows here will only be about staff-directed breaks, only for the student Derek, and only from September 1st, 2020 forward. Okay. All right. Let's now take it to one more level. Okay. And what if I want to look at the relationship between one more thing? And let's say I want to look at the type of support, but I want to look at one other dimension. What about with timeout and door closed? Now look what's happened. I've got two filters that are from different questions, student and date. So that works well for and. This is certainly a third different question, which is type of support. So and works well for their relationship. But now I've got a fourth filter, which is within the same type of question. So how do I handle that? So now I come back to the third option down here for filter logic and say apply customized logic. Okay, so now you can see what's happened here is that all the filters have been set up as having the relationship or. But you already know that can't be quite right because and is the relationship I want between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. The only place where I want an or is for 3 and 4. Okay, so I go in here and I'm just going to edit. I change or to and because I want F1 and F2. And I also want F2 and F3. But where the or comes in is between F3 and F4, so I simply put in a parentheses. So now it reads, please filter F1 and F2 and either F3 or F4. Okay, so now what I've done is I've had a or relationship between the two filters that have the same question, which is type of support, and I have and relationships between the other ones. Okay, so These are ways in which you can build up different filters to basically drill down and look at particular things within a report. The way I like to think about this is like you're doing an experiment. I'm trying to figure out what could possibly cause some of the variation. Is a student more or less likely to have certain kinds of situations happen during different days of the week, if you're recording days of the week? Are certain breaks likely to happen with some staff more than with other staff? So I could even do that. Let's just go back and look at that kind of thing, right? So I'm going to delete this one, delete this one. So I can say, okay, I want to look at for certain students who are the highest reporting staff in a program. So I can come here and say, let's look at this student when that student is being reported by a certain type of staff. Are they more likely to have certain kinds of incidents than with others? Okay. So again, I'm in a situation where I can begin to drill down into the data to look at what factors are driving certain kinds of things that I'm measuring with my form. Okay. So to review, each filter is associated with potentially a different question within your form. And you can build up different filters to look at analyses of different properties within your data system. Okay, so I hope this was helpful as a kind of an introduction to what can be done with filtering. If you want to get into more complicated aspects of filtering, the Educata manual is online and available for you with worked examples so you can begin to pull apart your data in interesting and powerful ways.